Welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams-Birch, and this podcast, it exists for you. Whether you're a music lover, an educator, a choir member, each week we bring guests to the show to help explore what matters in music. I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to the show. Hello, and welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams-Birch, and today you get to meet Irish choral music champion, conductor, educator, Kodály trained, awesome human being, my new friend, Kevin Boushel. In this conversation, Kevin shares the history of Irish choral music, some really wonderful and interesting thoughts that we can use as we approach multiculturalism, multilingualism, coalition building, anti-racism. This conversation is really a good one for thinking, but also for inspiring us to really think about normalizing cultural exploration. And I love the position in which Kevin brings his research and his experiences and his passion for education to the table for us to listen to. So I'm really excited for you to hear this episode. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Perform International. Even more so, I met Kevin because of Perform International's Zoe. So I am extra thankful for Perform International today. I don't want to talk anymore because you need to hear this awesome conversation with my new friend, Kevin Boushel. Today on the Music Ed Matters podcast, we are talking to Kevin Boushel all the way from Dublin, Ireland. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, how's it going?
I'm so excited for this conversation. Thanks for making time.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited too.
So, Kevin, I met you at ACDA because of our mutual friend Zoe with Perform International. Shout out to our podcast sponsors. Whoop, whoop. But Zoe's hilarious. She loves choral music. And I think it's a combination of y'all being from the same place and your excitement for all the great things going on in Ireland that she came like sprinting up to me. There's this person you must meet right now, and they must be on your podcast immediately. I'm so excited. Will you tell the listeners who's Kevin Boushel?
Okay, yes, sure, totally. My name is Kevin Boushel, and I am a PhD researcher and conductor from Dublin, Ireland. So I'm doing my PhD on the Government of Ireland Scholarship at Dublin City University, where I have founded and I direct the Dublin City University Chamber Choir. I also work with University College Dublin on the south side of Dublin, working as the Associate Conductor of their School of Music, working with their Symphony, Orchestra and Philharmonic Choir, with Kieran Crilly and Amy Ryan there. And so my research, I should also mention, yes, that I studied conducting in the Kodály Institute as well under Peter Erday. Yes, absolutely passionate about choral music, about conducting, passionate about contemporary music in particular. And I'm a big advocate for Irish choral music as well. We're a bit of an underdog. So I try and do my best to highlight Irish choral music everywhere I can be, and to be a bit of a champion of Irish choral music and contemporary Irish choral music in particular. I think that's me in a nutshell.
Taste. Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna dive in to you championing Irish choral music in a second. But how did you find music? Give us a little bit of the background growing up.
So growing up, I come from a very musical family, but I'm the first person in the family to pursue music as a career. So my grandparents met singing in the Irish radio choir, the Radio Éireann Singers, and
That's
then
so cool.
it's a great story. It gets even better. My granddad came into the first rehearsal, met my grandmother, and she was only there for a few weeks because she was flying off to Geneva to take a job at the United Nations. And my granddad followed her to Geneva and proposed to her on the spot after 5 weeks of knowing her, and they spent a
Wow.
lifetime together. Yeah, it's a great story. Yeah. And so then all of their family was incredibly musical, from, playing Rachmaninoff piano concertos to being the drummer and lead singer of a rock band, one of my other uncles, and then my dad as well was a great singer as well. So that instilled a lot of like love or graw, as we say in Ireland, a lot of graw for music. Um, and I was sent to Kodály classes as a kid, you know. So I always kind of liked music, but I have to say the first time that I kind of loved music was when I was about 14 years old, and I first heard the Eric Whitacre singers' Light and Gold album, and I think it was A Boy and a Girl. And I remember listening to it before and just thinking to myself, I have never heard a sound like that before in my entire life. You know, like I had grown up like, you know, on a steady diet of the Beatles and all of this, like, and I'd heard and sort of modern pop music and then all the classics through my mum and dad. But like, I had heard a lot of different types of sounds, but I'd never heard anything like contemporary a cappella choral music. It just blew my mind, these sounds. And like, these are coming from nothing but human voices. That just absolutely astounded me. The sound of that music. So that's when I fell in love with choral music. And so then I went to study music, and then the so again, studying music, loving music. Then when I decided I could make a career out of this thing was when Chanticleer came and played in the National Concert Hall in Dublin,
Oh,
and there
wow.
was an after party. There was an after party in the Stag's Head pub, in Dublin City Centre, and it was also coinciding with, I think, the 30th or the 40th anniversary party of Anuna, the Irish choir. And so
Yes.
we had all in the same pub, Chanticleer, Anuna, people from Voces 8, people from the King's Singers. I think there was a couple of Talis scholars in that room as well,
Whoa.
and me drinking a pint of Guinness. and and so we were there just hanging out, chatting, all of these people, and then I started singing, you know, like barbershop tags with Eric Alatorre and a couple of the other uh, Chanticleer folks, and I was just like, oh my god, they're just nerds, just like me. Like they're just like me. They're just really cool. They just love doing this stuff, and they just decided to keep doing it. So that's when I decided to keep doing it too, and I went to study conducting, and that's how I got where I am.
Wow, I love that your light bulb moments. One's about an album by a single composer. One is an evening in a pub. That's just such a cool spark that got you there. So you went right after school and did the Kodai conducting training. Tell us a little bit about you. You've put together programs from kindergartners through adult eds. Tell us some of the experiences that you've had in that realm.
Yes. Yes, so I went to the Kodály Institute to do the diploma in advanced choral conducting, and that comes with all of the Kodály pedagogy classes and training as well. So that was great. Then when I came back, Dublin City University happened to just launch this part-time master's in choral studies. I wasn't planning to be a perpetual student, but things just sort of fell that way. So I was thinking of coming back. I'm going to work in the real world. I'm not going to be a student anymore. But this part-time master's came up, and it was just Monday evenings, and it was like, wow, this is perfect. So I signed up for the MA in choral studies in DCU, and I kept, and then I was working full time as a music educator, putting the skills that I got to work with a company in Ireland called the Mobile Music School, who send tutors to schools all around Dublin, all around the country, really. And so I was just being sent. I just had my Google Calendar was just being filled, being sent literally to library workshops for old age pensioners, to kindergartens, to Irish language schools in, you know, Waterford in the south, in the sunny southeast, to like every private schools, public schools, secondary schools, primary schools, everything. So that just gave me such a panoramic view of music education and the possibilities that are there. And really what I just learned the most from that is the value of meeting people where they are, number one. Um you know, there's when it comes to teaching kids, I developed a great love for teaching particularly very young primary school kids, and sort of the mantra that I always take when I'm working with kids is don't take them literally, but do take them seriously. So I always think of the example, if a child comes up to you and says, when I grow up, I want to be a fire truck, which I think is like a Simpsons quote or something. You know, you could take that literally and say, oh, that's silly. You can't grow up to become an inanimate object. Or you can not take it literally, but take it seriously and say, oh, you want to, what do fire trucks do? Fire trucks help people. So you want to grow up and you want to help people when you grow up. That's lovely. That's incredible. So meeting people where they are, finding music that connects with them, and then finding ways to turn that music into an educational, musical and skill building experience. Just really shaped then how I've become a researcher now, and it's a perspective that informs everything that I do now, conducting collegiate ensembles and conducting my own research then into choral music as well.
I feel like you just defined the power of music education so beautifully. That connective piece, and then bringing in the music to take them to the next skill level. I mean, that was quotable. Very, very good, Kevin. Very good. This is exciting.
Well, thank you.
So you're working on your PhD. We'll talk about your dissertation later. But let's dive into this whole, you've kind of skirted around it. The Irish choral music and the culture. Let's champion some awesome Irish choral music. What do you want to say?
Yeah, so Irish choral music it's a funny thing. So I recently wrote an article for the Irish Bulletin of the Irish branch of the Bulletin of the Irish branch of the International Council on Traditional Music, called The Irishness of Irish Choral Music. And so we asked this question, like, what is Irishness? What does it mean to be Irish? And choral music has always held kind of a tenuous or thorny position within Irish culture. Um, so the first time that choral music came to Ireland was through the medieval monks in the monasteries who brought it as part of this European chant tradition, and pre-medieval monks even. I think the first manuscript music from a monastery in Ireland comes from the 6th century. And
Oh,
then we have, after that, then the Norman invasion, and we have the British occupation of Ireland. The sort of the pinnacle of choral music in Ireland becomes the Protestant cathedrals and Protestant spaces. So we have this massive divide appearing between the Anglo-Irish ascendancy and the native Catholic Irish community. So that brings us then to independence in the early 20th century. And we have this really sharp divide and this real cognitive dissonance when it comes to choral music and really any form of classical music as we may understand it, where it's viewed as very much a Protestant thing because it has been dominated by Protestantism in Ireland for so long. You look at Charles Villiers Stanford, born in Dublin, but very much part of this Anglo-Irish Protestant tradition. And there's a great researcher of Irish music, Axel Klein, who found a Department of Finance memo from the 1930s talking about defunding our National Symphony Orchestra, saying, why should we fund such a Victorian form of recreation? So we have these very nativist movements in the 20th century against art music, because there has been such a dissonance at the time, because there was such a disdain for the sort of the normative Anglo-Irish and Anglo-centric and Protestant ideals at the time. So extend that to choral music, then what can a choral composer in Ireland do? Well, some of them, like Karl Hardbeck, travelled the country collecting folk songs and arranged them then for choral music. But he was criticised by later composers by being too strictly adherent to the folk songs and not actually creating anything new with them, just putting some harmonies underneath them, but not actually creating anything new the way that someone like, let's say, Kodai did by setting folk songs as a cantus firmus in Renaissance style polyphony, for example.
mm-hmm.
Other composers then, let's say Brian Boydell, who, in my opinion, would be sort of the Samuel Beckett of Irish classical music, just decided to do something totally new, totally modern. I don't care. Call it Irish, call it European, call it international, whatever you want. And he just did something that was very new and it just sort of becomes Irish by association, and people say, oh, that's, I guess that's Irish modernism, in the same way that Ives did something just completely new and it became known as American modernism.
Hmm.
So, but still, there's always been this sort of cultural tension. But thankfully now, as we've moved towards from the sort of the latter 20th century into now the 21st century, we have a very thriving Irish choral scene of Irish choral compositions and arrangers. We have our own choral publishing company that was founded only a few years ago, Colino Music Publishers. So we finally have our own choral publishing house, which is great. We have our national advocacy organisation, Sing Ireland, who've created projects with educational resources for the classroom, and there is now sort of a movement and to really show the value to the Irish people as well, because we sometimes, in Ireland, we have this post-colonial hangover, as it's called, where Professor Joseph Lee talked about it, the shriveled Irish perspectives on Irish potential. We always rely on this outside help, where our two sort of state choirs are conducted by conductors who are from England and who fly in from England, and this kind of, not they're fabulous conductors, but there's always been this kind of um, lack of introspection in art music and in classical music and in choral music in Ireland. So that's being challenged really recently, and it's great to see now Irish music really taking center stage. It was such an honor to be able to present at the ACDA on Irish choral music, and it's great to see works by the likes of Sean Doherty being performed at the ACDA by performing choirs. So yes, Irish choral music is really just it's such a special and wonderful thing.
So I want to ask some questions, and this is my lack of research coming out. When I think Irish music, I'm thinking those folk tunes, I'm thinking the Gaelic language. What are the aspects that make Irish choral music something that is so special that we should all be programming?
Yeah, so and then we yes, so that gets us to the question of sort of what is Irish music? Are we only talking about the jigs and reels, the music that's played by Cayley bands on the fiddle and the uilleann pipes? Or are we also extending that then to the song tradition and sort of the three song traditions, or the three song categories that are well known of gold trees, which are morning songs, gown trees, which are laughing songs, and soon trees, which are lullabies, sleeping songs? Are we extending it to the kind of the folk songs, the folk ballads, the pub songs like the Rocky Road to Dublin and or Danny Boy, or the Owl Triangle? Are we extending it to U2 and the Cranberries? So where do we stop calling Irish music Irish music? And I think that that's sort of part of the cultural tension of 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 what it means to write Irish music. And there's also, even among composers in Ireland, some composers are very averse, particularly in instrumental music, to being branded as an Irish composer. They want to be an international composer, not an Irish composer. Um, but that in ways has led to sort of a bit of a failure of Ireland to represent itself in the national stage and to really assert itself. But to go back to your question of sort of what makes Irish choral music Irish, it's the question. It's the ultimate question. I mean, like, is it just the fact that it was written in Ireland? Does Irish choral music also include music written about Ireland from abroad? For a while, some Irish choral competitions like the Feis Ceoil mandated an Irish choral piece, but it could include an Irish song arranged by someone from another country, or music on the theme of Ireland. So I think when you try to define something, you set certain boundaries, but I think in terms of what makes Irish music Irish, it's just really what you bring to it, and it's what you can bring from it. And I know we're going to talk later as well about sort of the pedagogical and possibilities of this. But it's really, yes, what perspectives you bring from it, what perspectives you draw from it. Um, and as well, something we can even think about as well is with a song like Danny Boy is not just the origin of the song, but the history of the song as well. So yes, Danny Boy has its origins in the north of Ireland, words set to the Londonderry air or the Derry air, and but really, you wouldn't often hear the song Danny Boy sung in Ireland. It's more likely to be heard sung abroad, either by traveling Irish choirs or maybe American choirs programming an Irish piece, or you'd hear it on St. Patrick's Day, or you'd hear it in Irish bars. It has really become a song of the diaspora. So then that more so than a song of the people in Ireland themselves. People in Ireland are more likely to sing other Irish, songs. So how does that then shift our perspective? What story can we tell with that? Can we link it into other diasporic nations and peoples then? Not just analyzing or addressing the origin, but the total life of a piece of music and the life of the composer, the arranger, and what they've brought to it as well. So there is a richness there when we really dig deep into this question of what does it mean to be Irish and what can Irishness be.
This is good. I'm so happy that you're sharing not just your passion and your championing of Irish choral music, but just these conversations, because it's something that can apply to everything as we're spending time. This is obviously happening, and this recording is happening in the summer. As we're spending time reflecting on what we're going to work on next, it's such a great time to really evaluate more of the details behind a piece of music. It kind of leads really well into that idea of multiculturalism and multilingualism. I mean, we hinted at the Gaelic language. How does all of that multiisms tie in?
So yes, my presentation at the ACDA was entitled "Approaching Contemporary Irish Choral Music," and I spoke about Irish choral music within the context of culturally relevant and culturally sustaining pedagogies. And these concepts, which I'm sure many of your listeners may be familiar with, and if they're not, there's a great research report in the Choral Journal, which details a lot of the research into these areas, which I would recommend. Um, but really, these pedagogies talk about challenging the Anglocentric, um, monolingual systems of education that we end up sometimes sliding into or falling into because they are so normative, because they have been so hegemonic for so long, and where they stem from, what kind of attitudes they stem from, and what kind of cultures they grate against then, and what kind of stories or ways of learning or wealths of knowledge are being erased or silenced when we have this singular normative method of approaching um, choral music, of approaching choral education. So what I propose with when it comes to Irish choral music is weaving it into a quilt, a diverse tapestry of multicultural, multilingual music. And when you actually look at the history of Ireland, it's quite a tragic history. Our culture was stamped out. Really, we're the only country in Europe with a population today that is smaller than the population 200 years ago. So pre-famine, the island of Ireland had 8 million people living on this island pre-famine, and now the other. I think about it, the census data for Ireland just came out, and Ireland has just passed 5 million people. So we're talking about massive drops there in numbers. And what the British, by in their colonization of Ireland, really centralized a lot of the country on Dublin. Dublin was the economic center of Ireland as a sort of an annex of Great Britain. And so that led to really a massive lack of funding and a lack of sort of wealth and generation in the rest of the country, along the Atlantic coast of the country, in particular. So Um, and then as well, there's the death of the Irish language as well, which you mentioned as well. Um, Literacy. This is again, Professor Joseph Lee talks about this. The spreading of education and literacy education in Ireland meant not Irish literacy, English literacy. If you could speak um, and read and write in Irish, you were still considered illiterate because the standards was the reading and writing of English. So we see actually, those attitudes from 200 years ago really chiming with the with what Paris and Alim talk about with culturally sustaining pedagogy, about that kind of outdated or exclusive form of understanding of education. So really, when we program Irish music, especially when we program Irish language choral music, we are celebrating a subversive and emancipatory form of music making that resonates with a lot of students from a lot of different backgrounds who also come from post-colonial countries, who have come from backgrounds that have suffered under white settler capitalism as well. So there's so many possibilities to build coalitions here. I have here next to me. This is a book that I spoke a lot about in my presentation as well. Emma Dabbery's book, What White People Can Do Next, From Allyship to Coalition. And this book is just absolutely brilliant for really challenging not just tokenism, not allyship, but coalition building. Can we, she quotes another scholar talking about, rather than, bringing us up to maybe the upper decks of the slave ship, how about we just demolish the whole ship, and do something new? So, when we present Irish music and Irish choral music through this lens, it really serves our communities for building coalitions and understanding that diversity is our strength, that multilingualism, multiculturalism, viewing the world through a different lens is our strength. And um, sorry to go on just a little bit
No, this
further,
is
but
good.
just because we were talking about the Irish diaspora as well, and I mentioned this in my presentation at the ACDA. Um, the Irish diaspora, unfortunately, have, as particularly in America, have been racialized as white. And Emma Dabbery herself talks about this, how talks about the origins of racism. Some scholars have traced the origins of racism to the plantations on Barbados and Virginia, where the slave masters decided that they would pit the African slaves against the Irish indentured labourers by sort of spreading rumours among the Irish indentured labourers. Yes, you're working for next to nothing, but at least you're not like them. At least you're not like those others. So immediately sowing seeds of division because there was a threat of the workers uniting to form a rebellion against the slave masters. So really, the Irish, unfortunately, have been at the centre, both as victims and as participants in systemic racism. Um, so when we understand this and we try to deconstruct it, I think there was a lot of Irish Americans at the ACDA at my presentation who had never really heard Irishness presented in this kind of manner because we're so used to Irishness and the Irish people being racialized as white, you know. But that just speaks to the lie of this, monocultural sort of the lie of whiteness. Whiteness is monolingual, Anglocentric, sort of uh, colonial capitalist kind of centrism, or hegemony, I should say, and it seeks to erase cultures of even those who are racialized as white as well. So again, it just speaks to by framing it in this way, it really liberates. It helps again to emancipate and liberate the Irishness from the constraints of systemic racism that we have been roped into historically, particularly in the United States. Frederick Douglass talks about the Irish at home are the friend of the oppressed everywhere, but they are taught to hate the Negro as soon as they land on American soils, is the quote from him. And so when we really just think about it in these ways of deconstructing these systems, we really can build coalitions through Irish music as part of a diverse tapestry of a choral program that we're putting together.
I love how you wove that back into that gorgeous quilt analogy, that it's not about the boxes or the labels, it's about the multi-ism that is happening among what you're choosing and what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And as well, there's something I'm thinking about as well, is like we should do this with all cultures as well. We shouldn't just have like, you know, here is the standard repertoire, and here is the world music or the folk music or the ethnic music or the other music, or a fun one, as the kind of as music from the non-classical canon is sometimes cast. We should treat all of them the same way. So we should, when if we're programming Brahms, for example, we shouldn't just say, "Oh yeah, we're programming Brahms because we sing Brahms every year. Every choir sings Brahms. Everyone loves to listen to Brahms." No, let's actually try to deconstruct Brahms as well. Who was he? What did it mean to be German in the 19th century? What were his who was his muse? What were his inspirations? What kind of folk musics did he engage with as well? You know, and it normalizes this mode of cultural exploration, so that we don't fall into the trap of, you know quote unquote normal music and quote unquote other music. You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
I think that this is that finding this way of celebrating and honoring all cultures as 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 each having their own like unique identity and voice and reasons for celebration, and creating this multicultural tapestry of music and celebration in our rehearsals, in our classrooms.
And in our concerts, it sounds so exciting, and I love how you've broken it down. You've given us the visual of this gorgeous quilt and what our role is in all of this to explore and normalize cultural exploration. That's a great quote too. Can we pivot slightly? We've covered some really great ground, but I want to make sure that we've spent time on the pedagogy side of things. And I'm guessing you're going to hit us with some pedagogy dealing with the Gaelic language or other things that we need to know. What pedagogy are you going to throw our way?
Well, when it comes to pedagogy of the Irish language, so I'd say when you're approaching an Irish language piece, the best thing that you can do is to reach out to the composer or the arranger, because it's most likely that they will know how to approach it. And if they don't, hit me up, send me an email. I'm happy to help with anyone listening to the podcast. But there's also plenty of people in Ireland who I'm sure will be able to help. There are some websites as well, such as chonglan.ie. So I'll spell that out. That's TEANGLANN.ie, which has a database of Irish words. And it has they hired voice actors to read out each of these words, basically to read the dictionary.
Whoa.
So most Irish words, if you're approaching a piece and there's confusion about a word, you can listen to one of these voice actors from the three dialects of Irish speaking it, and I'll return to the three dialects of Irish. But so that's another good resource for hearing it. But yes, in terms of the Irish language, um, just to give you a little bit about the Irish language, so it's one of the Celtic languages. So the Celtic languages would be Irish, Scots Gaelic, Manx Gaelic from the Irish from the Isle of Man, Welsh, Breton from the northwest of France, and Cornish from Cornwall. So those are the six Celtic languages, and they are related to each other and they are not related to anyone else. So they're very, very unique languages. They're one of the few languages in the world that are, and this is for all the linguists listening today, that are VSO, that is verb, subject, object. So rather than I drove the car, subject, verb, object, it's Human me car. So verb, subject, object. I drove, or drove I the car, kind of thing. So a little bit
Oh,
of
yeah.
linguistic nerdyism there. But anyway, the language has three main dialects: the north, the west, the northern, the western, and the southern dialect. There's a belief that long, long ago there was an eastern dialect, but like I said, the colonialization or the colonization of Dublin really stamped that out for a long time. So an important thing to do when you're approaching an Irish piece of music is to understand where that piece comes from. So, a very popular Irish language text that a lot of people have set and a lot of people perform is Dulamon. So there's a version by Michael McGlynn for lower voices, which is on a newly composed melody, and then there's the folk song as well that many arrangers have put for choir. Now, this particular piece comes from the north of Ireland, and so the word Gaelach which is how I would pronounce it, meaning Irish Gaelach. Up in the north, they would say Gaela. They don't pronounce the ch at the end of words, so you have to make sure you're not singing Dulamanna binna be Dulamanna Gaelach. You have to say Gaela. You have to say Gaela. So
Wow.
that's just an example of how the origin of a text or a song is very important. In the same way that, like, if you're singing, a mass setting by Reinberger as opposed to Palestrina, you might sing Excelsis instead of Excelsis or Excelsis in the same way. So it's really understanding what was the composer hearing in their head when they were composing this. So, for that reason, I think the most important thing to do if you're approaching an Irish text is to reach out to the composer themselves and say, what sounds were you imagining in your head when you were setting this? And for the most part, I'm like, all the Irish composers I know are very nice. They're sound. So I'm sure they'll get back to you and they'll send you a little recording of them speaking the text out loud with phonetics. So those are just some considerations when you're approaching the Irish language.
Wow. Dialects, reaching out, being aware of where it came from. It's such a great and doable approach to this whole coalition building, anti racist, actionable items, all because we're talking
It's
about
really,
Irish
it's
music.
exactly, and it's such an enriching, it really enriches the music when you put in this extra work. And like you said, it's not that much, it's not incredibly difficult to go just that little bit extra and just make sure that are we really honoring the music? Are we honoring the people that created the music, not just the composer? But if it's a folk song and a folk text, are we honoring the people of Donegal when we sing Dulamon, when we sing Báidí Nailami? And are we honoring sort of the people of Ireland? And are we honoring all of our students as well, who come from backgrounds who might identify with the Irish struggle for independence and the Irish struggle to be themselves in the face of colonialism, of British colonialism. So just taking those extra few steps, it shows a level of care to our students and to our audiences that prevents them from feeling silenced, that helps them to identify with what's being sung and to really see themselves in our choral programs.
It's so important. And it's been so fun to see you be excited to share this amazing heritage and this amazing culture and get it out beyond the 5 million that currently live on the island. It's really
Yeah, yeah,
exciting.
absolutely, absolutely. I think, and as well, just with the new choral publishing house, Collino, and with the Contemporary Music Centre in Ireland as well, making special digital collections. It's easier than ever to access Irish choral music from Irish composers. So, yeah, I can't recommend it highly enough. If any of the listeners have any questions, please do contact me, because I'd be happy to speak to anyone who is interested in Irish choral music. I'll speak forever.
Yes. Oh, this is great. Well, I'll make sure to put your email address in the episode notes. And I'll also link that really great website you gave us to hear the Gaelic language by all the voice actors reading the dictionary. And I'll make sure to list the Sing Ireland and that new publishing house. How do you spell that?
So Colleen O, Cailino.
All
And I
right, got it.
believe that there is a fada or an accent on the second I.
Okay. I'll Google. I'll make sure I do it correctly.
Yeah, brilliant.
That's awesome. Well, normally at the end of the episode, I ask a series of questions, but you've been really awesome. You've already covered a really great book. You've already given us organizations to look at. You've already given us websites that we can go to find more information. So really the last question is the biggest question. No pressure. What's the one thing that really matters that you want the listener to walk away from this episode with?
The one thing that really matters, I think, is just really to always think about singing beyond the score, and just really thinking beyond the score. What does it mean that I'm singing this music? It doesn't mean nothing. There's nothing is neutral, It doesn't mean that it's good, doesn't mean that it's bad, but nothing is neutral. So always think, what does it mean when I'm choosing this repertoire rather than other repertoire? Why am I choosing this repertoire? Challenge yourself, and you may come away and still have the same choices, and still, but it's good that you've challenged yourself to answer those questions, so now. So I think really the question is always sort of, what am I doing here? What does it mean? And how can I best serve my community through my work? Because we have such an awesome power and responsibility as music educators to our community. So always just stop for a moment, just take that time to think beyond just the sheet music of what can I do to really enact positive change in my life, in my students' life, and in my community.
That's so inspiring, Kevin. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, friends, what did you think? Are you as excited as I am to program choral music from Ireland? I mean, I'm not going to lie, I've always been scared of the Gaelic language, but Kevin makes it seem so approachable and sounds like he'll be there to help. So check out the episode notes for more things below. If you're looking for more support, check us out at patreon.com/Music Ed Matters podcast. You can find me on the socials. You can find me on my website, emilybirch.org/contact. But you know what? Whatever you're doing today, my friend, you matter. We all know that music matters, especially like exclamation point, Irish choral music. And I'll see you next time on the Music Ed Matters podcast.